This is the most nerve-wracking part. And we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to SVT time. My name is Dino. I'm here with my glorious co-host, Mr. Dom Liberati.
Howdy.
Dom, this is our, I think this is our 11th episode of SVT time.
I think this is 12, actually. I think the last one. I know, right?
You know, that does, yeah, whatever. More importantly, we have Mr. Tony Levin joining us today. Very, very special guest. Tony, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, this is an honor having you on the show. Just, you know, as I say, as a longtime friend and an Ampeg family member, and you know, we've got a lot of great questions and topics, and yeah, it's like as I say, this is loosey goosey. So
you know, what's funny is the longer it goes, I don't have much of a Boston accent anymore, but I used to have a very thick one. And Dino and I are, the more we talk and hear each other, the thicker my Boston accent is going to be. So enjoy this at the beginning when I'm speaking like a
by the end of this, you'll be saying Portaflex and
Portaflex. Yeah.
Dom and I have been working together long enough that he actually he can mimic my Boston accent pretty accurately.
That could be useful.
And I know he does it in my absence.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Speaking of loosey goosey, I need to put him in the other room. Hold on.
Yeah, there you go. See, animals are always welcome, Dom. So, how have you been, Tony? How's everything been treating you, considering, you know, the pandemic and everything, and you being, of course, I mean, you spent the better part of your career on the road touring, and you know, obviously in 2020 it just came through a.
Dom, I still hear your dog barking. What is that?
That's actually not my dog. Whose dog is that?
Mine. I'm going to go downstairs and put the dogs in another room. Excuse me. That's a great question, and I will get back to it.
No worries.
Good. We'll play some background music in the meantime.
Hit a button like. Ding.
Yeah, really? We'll play some King Crimson or something in the background.
Yeah.
You know?
So, Dino, just so you know, when I posted this today on my Instagram and I said, join us today, I get to talk to one of my favorite bassists of all time. I was actually talking about you. I
was going to say, you were probably talking about me, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Johan is saying there's no voice here.
No voice.
On Facebook. So I don't know if that's something on Facebook side or not, and he's back.
How am I doing so far?
Doing awesome.
I dodged that question pretty well, wouldn't you say?
I was going to say,
oh, geez, I'd like to answer that, but the dogs were barking, and I gotta go. So forgive me interrupting, but how am I doing? I'm doing great. Can't complain. We're all having that kind of year, all us musicians. And when I start to feel sorry for myself, I think of the ones who have it worse than me. I do have my home studio as I'm in, and an occasional project to play on. No live work, which is what I most love to do when my wife and dogs are getting, well, they're used to it now, to seeing me at home, which is something we don't usually share.
Yeah.
We've adjusted. It took a while, and we're okay with that. So there you go.
Yeah. The studio looks gorgeous. Looks awesome in the background.
Thanks.
You didn't want to carry the SVT up the stairs?
I didn't. In fact, I didn't. You're right.
Tony and I have a long-standing running joke about his studio being up a flight of stairs and always having to carry, we won't say what it is, the slang term, but it's the big effer up the stairs.
Well, the last house I was in until maybe 4 years ago, my studio was in the attic, and I did indeed, with help, carry it up there. And once I mic'd it, it lived up there until I moved it for many years. 10 years of recordings.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, are you doing a lot of do you have a fair amount of studio work that you've been doing at home, Tony?
I do. People send me tracks to play bass on. It's the process is different than it used to be, because it used to be I'm on the road, sorry, but when I'm home for 2 weeks in a month, I'd be happy to do that track. And now I'm home, so it's less intense, but that's a good thing than it used to be. I used to try to jam it in the little bit of time I was home. So I wouldn't say I have a track to play every day, but a lot of days I do. And it's a great pleasure. It's beyond a pleasure. It's an honor and a pleasure to play on people's music, if the music is good, that I wouldn't normally get a chance to play on. In the old days when having a player like me involved flying me in hotels and renting a studio and all that. Those were great days, and there's elements of that I miss, playing with other people in real time. That was great.
Sure.
But there's something pretty special about somebody from New Zealand and I'm making music, collaborating with their music. It's pretty special.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Do you find it a little? Does it take you? Do you like spend more time with the track than you would in the studio, or vice versa? In terms of like, you don't have a producer there guiding you. You don't. Do you feel like, especially a player like you, like you're like, all right, I get to like put my mark on it and be me, and just kind of like you don't have to like be as confined, maybe?
That's a very good point. I never thought about it in those ways, but it's very interesting. It's very different. In my experience, actually, I've had a lot of experience, done a lot of albums, and the pace and the way it goes is very much a product of what the producer likes and what the artist likes. It's really not up to the backup players. We're expected to do it. If we have a month to do a Peter Gabriel track, great. and if we have 2 hours to do some track, or an hour and a half, and then we're doing a whole album in one day, 10 songs, great. That's the way it is. So yes, that's entirely different, because whatever the pace of the producer and artist, I get the track here and I work at my pace, which is different now than it keeps changing. I can be very fast at a pace at getting a sense of what I want on the track, but nowadays I take more time with it. And just recently I was telling somebody, it's not really relevant to much, but since I'm on the subject, I never used to do this, but I'll make a chart of the track and get used to it and pick a bass that seems like it's, fortunately I have a lot of basses here, pick a bass that seems like it's going to work for that. And then late at night, I'll get the sound right, and I'll do a run through, not perfect, but just a run through or two. And that's all. And then I'll go to bed. And I didn't used to be that way. I used to obsess and play. And I'll come back in the morning and listen to it with really different ears. And sometimes I think, like, well, it's the wrong bass. It really is wrong. And very often I think that's really right. And I won't bother to fix that track. I'll just start over again. But I'll know that the number two, me, that's listening to it, agreed with the first guy that's the right part. So because I don't know why I started doing it that way. Maybe just because I have the time.
Yeah.
So I've changed. The short answer is I've changed my own process. But it is my process, and that's one of the good things about home studio recording.
Yeah. You mentioned being on a lot of records. I think I read somewhere you're on like over 500 probably albums, not even just tracks. Yeah. Can you?
I don't know.
I was gonna say, is there like an inner catalog that you keep, or is it just kind of like, do you ever stumble across, like, you'll hear something and you're just like, oh my gosh, I forgot I played on that, like on the radio? Or
yeah, that happens. Yeah, or I'm told or reminded about something I played on once or twice. Somebody's talked about something I think I didn't play on that it turns out I did. And like all of us, I'm not keeping track. I think all musicians I've known what we're very good is focusing on what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. Not so good at looking at the future, which is why there's not many retirement plans for musicians, which is kind of a good thing, because guys like me keep working, because we didn't think ahead of time about that. And also, I don't spend much time looking back. I certainly don't count as if there's as if it's some accomplishment. It was just what it was. And really, the only time I even look back about my own career and what I've done is when I'm doing interviews and being asked about it. Like all of us, I don't sit around thinking, oh, I did this, or this track reminds me of this. I'm not that way.
Yeah, that's great. It's cool. It's definitely a way to stay present. Dino, you want to take this question?
Yeah. So it looks like Iman asks, "Hi Tony, if you had to pick a few tracks recorded in your career, Peter Gabriel solo, etc., which, I know you guys can read this. I'm just reading it as well. But which best highlight your vision taste of the SVT tone? What would they be? Cheers from London."
You read that, first of all, you read that very well. Because I had read it and I thought, oh, that's okay.
Coming from a New Hampshire education, I guess.
And hearing you do it, I'm really drawn into it.
I should be a narrator.
Yeah, can we get like a sleep app with Dino on it?
That's my wife. She'll tell you. I am my own sleep app.
That's good.
Answer the question. I very hard to pick. He very nicely didn't ask for my favorites. My favorites I don't have, but which highlight my vision or taste of the SVT. Really hard to remember. I played a lot of tracks that had the SVT. Dino has a photo of, I'm not sure he can pull it up. He's a genius, but maybe not that kind of genius. Photo I just sent him a few minutes ago saying, hey, I came across this of my SVT at the early King Crimson sessions.
Yep.
Early in the sense of when I joined the band in the early 80s. And I happened to come across a picture of Robert Fripp standing in front of my SVT.
We're going to do this old school.
Oh, I was hoping that you were going to push Dino to the limits, and this is the way we shared last time. I was like,
well, because Norman, in fairness, Aaron and I and Tony had tried sharing my screen, and for some reason it doesn't work well with Chrome sharing. So
I mean, that's actually pretty clear. I can see it.
Pretty darn. You're doing a good job.
Yeah,
my hands are actually kind of steady today too.
So amazingly, that's Robert Fripp going like, oh, here's Tony's bass amp, and I don't know why. Probably asked him to do it, and there it is. And I'm not sure. I don't think that's in '81. I think it's in '82. Maybe the second album I made with King Crimson, Beat.
And you use that in the studio to record.
Sure. In those days, on everything, on every album I did, but it's not often that how the DI and the amp is mixed is different on everyone. And because that wonderful question asked something about it connecting with the sound of the SVT, on that one I know they did use quite a bit of the amp sound.
Yeah.
So this is like so random, but you talked about mix, and I just want to know if I'm alone or not. So of all the songs and albums you've played on, when you get to like, oh, here's the final mix and it's sent back to you and you're like so excited to hear it, is it a majority, the bass should have been mixed louder, or is it like, yeah, it's pretty good? Or is it like, wow, the bass is really hot.
Cool.
Like Sledgehammer, the bass is super hot, which is awesome.
Good question. It's the answer is complex. I'm almost never sent the mix to check, and that's a good thing. Sometimes when I am sent the mix, I say, first thing I say is you don't want to be sending your mix to everybody in the band because they'll all give you suggestions. I won't actually. I'll say, okay, that's your mix, but you're going to have 6 suggestions like that the drums are too loud, that the drums are too soft, and you don't want. Usually, it's people who haven't done a lot of records that do that.
Yeah.
So I think
I just assumed you were getting the mix at the end, as in like, thanks, Tony. Here's the final track, not like, oh, here's.
Well, if it's King Crimson, we're all there in the room.
Yeah.
We're used to be there in the room. No, I'm not. I don't usually hear it, and when the record comes out and I hear it, I sometimes feel that the bass could have been a little louder. And Sledgehammer, I was shocked when I heard how loud the bass. I'm not saying it was too loud. I was shocked, and they had processed it a number of times after I was done with it. So I was pleasantly shocked by the level of the bass. So it varies a lot. And the truth is, I don't really. You know how we three could talk about this all day. How bass players listen to records is kind of a thing that's a little different than other people. And I don't get into the bass could have been louder, the bass could have been softer. I am very much into if the bass part is good and it's you really have to struggle to hear it. I don't like that.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with it being me. I like records where each person, man or woman who's playing an instrument is there as a person on the record, and if they're just really you're struggling to hear it, I don't like that. But otherwise, I let it be what it is. There's enough else to listen to on the record and on the bass part.
Mm.
Yeah. Speaking of King Crimson, when you're trying to think how I can ask this, but when you're in the studio, what is sort of like the writing process in such? I mean, King Crimson is so diverse. Obviously we call it progressive rock or progressive music. But I mean, I was just catching up on all my King Crimson this morning too, as well. But
wow.
Like, I was just thinking, like, you guys in the studio, do you have, you all come up with your own parts, obviously. But I'm just trying to envision what the writing process would be like in the studio while you're all in there. And how does it come to fruition to a final composition at the end of it?
Well, for one thing, it hasn't happened in a long time. So you're asking for the memory of a guy without a great memory. But it very different in different incarnations. I've been in 2, 3, 4 incarnations of the band. So back in the 80s, when I joined that band, we did write together, but very much either Robert or Adrian Ballou, our wonderful other guitar player, Robert Fripp, guitar player, writer, Adrian Ballou, guitar player, writer, singer, and one or the other would bring in really a piece. It was sort of done. They're both great writers. And then they would go through a process of, well, we crimsonized it, quote unquote, which Robert, I think, once compared to watching your child be molested.
Oh, man.
So, yes, we did things to it. We didn't like change. Hey, I want you to change the chord, but Bill and I would take off in a different, Bill Bruford and I might play in a different time signature or something like that. And a lot of stuff happened in the process of our rewriting the song together. So that's a very simple, general way of describing the way that was. By the 90s, when it was a different band, what we called the Double Trio, I don't remember so well how essentially it was sort of the same, but with more people in the room, there was probably less discussion and more just everybody playing. It changed, just turned it left. I can remember when Trey Gunn, a wonderful touch guitar player, and I, with our touch guitars, I was playing the stick. I think he had a War guitar. And we thought, just on our own, before rehearsals and writing, well, what if we tuned them in quarter tones with each other, or at least 4 of the strings, so that we could do scales and things in quarter tones. And okay, so like then Adrian brings in a song, and me and Trey are like, quarter tones. What can we do to this? So a lot of that, or you could also call it R&D, given the time and the funds to rent a rehearsal place for a month. Right. Crimson did a lot of R&D and a lot of, as it should be, a lot of stuff got thrown out. A lot of ideas that we had to try because they were there, like the quarter tones. And that's wonderful to be in a band that allows itself that degree of trying to really create stuff that it hasn't, other people haven't created, and even that band hasn't done before. Yeah. And hopefully you don't have to keep it all, and you can toss a lot of it out.
Yeah.
And nowadays, King Crimson really, we haven't been in the studio in quite a while. And this incarnation of 5, 6, 7 years is really good. But we just play live and we record the live albums.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's, you brought up a very good point. Like what we're hearing as the listening public, we're only hearing basically what made it out, and everything that you guys have, you didn't release or you tossed or whatever. I can only imagine like some of the works that.
Some of it, Robert would say, that's very good. Let's put it aside for another year or another time. And let me add that I just last July and August, I spent time in the studio with Liquid Tension Experiment, a very different band, and we write real time in the studio with some input from each guy, but pretty much hash it out and make the composition happen right while we're there. So and it works very well for that band. That involves, for one thing, having a lot of musical respect for the other guys in your band, so that you have your little idea and they say, well, wait a minute, let's go this way with it after that. So typically, John Petrucci would come in with a riff, and Jordan Rudess would learn it really, really quick. I would not learn it so quickly. I'd kind of lag behind trying to learn it. And after 10 minutes or something, Jordan said, well, what if we go from that to this? And then Mike Portnoy, the drummer, would say, well, guys, what if you do this? I had this idea. And in a couple hours, we have it's 5 minutes, and then it's 10 minutes, and then it's 15 minutes of really complex music, and we get our piece, and we could spend the rest of the day trying to play it and trying to remember and maybe adjust keys and stuff. So at least with that band, it's very much an organic, everybody's in the room. We're going to, at the end of the day, we're going to have at least, maybe not every day, but usually every day, we're going to have 10, 15 minutes of music composed, and the next day we'll do something else. And there's time, on a good day, there's time at night to jam, to record an hour of jams, and maybe some of that can be cut up and used, or maybe a whole jam. Well, it's never a whole jam because they're an hour long. Maybe it can be used as a piece, or maybe it can be used as a fodder, or as a little piece of the beginning of some other piece.
Yeah, that's very interesting too, because it's, I don't know how many, you don't see that as often these days, where, you know, 4 guys in a room just letting the recorder go and playing stuff, and then going back and listening and saying, well, that's really cool. This, you know, we can use this. And more stuff is born out of that. You know, these days it's always, I
don't know about these days, but the Stickman, we have recorded the same way. We Stickman with Marcus Reuter, myself and Pat Mastelotto, wonderful drummer. We've just been in the room together and come up with stuff that later becomes a piece. But also we usually lately the process of that, Marcus being German, is he'll write an entire piece with 2 stick part or 2 touch guitar parts. And Tony, here's your part. And I'll write some pieces in the same way. Marcus, here's your part. Change it. Do it exactly the same, or change it, or solo in this part. And Pat has very important contributions. And so we write remotely. But in the days when we can get together, there are, which counts, not last year, but frankly, we did the last show I did was with Stickman plus Gary Husband, a guest. We had a tour booked in last February, of China, of all the places. Oh, wow. Let's go to China. There's this thing going on there, but who knows? Japan and China. And first, when we were about to leave, it's really coming down here, the snow. We were about to leave, and China got canceled. And then we went there and played the Nagoya show, and then the rest of Japan got shut down that day. It was the last show, probably the last show, among the last shows done that day in Japan. And it was certainly the last show of what was going to be a longish tour. It was a very short one show, and we recorded it, and there was plenty of improv, and it's quite an album, and so we feel good about that.
That's
but
cool.
Of course, there's the fallout of that tour having been so short.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of similarities then between, you know, Liquid Tension, Stickmen, obviously the old King Crimson days, of the process, of just the process of writing, recording, producing music?
Yeah, I never thought about it until just now, you know, until today. But I think they're pretty different. I don't really think of similarities.
Okay.
Maybe there are some.
Do you approach each project like with the intent of, okay, do you like kind of create rules for yourself as a player? Is it just whatever this music serves, whatever serves this music kind of thing? Or do you go in like, okay, in this group, I'm going to stick to this kind of vibe?
Very good question. I think I need a cup of coffee to handle that question. That's a great question. Huh?
All right, well, I'll take a sip then.
I don't have I don't think I have any kind of rules. I'm trying to think. Maybe if as the hour goes on, I'll think of one example where I thought I better. Here's an example. In Stickmen, our trio, I just play the stick, the Chapman stick. It's a wonderful instrument. It has bass strings and guitar strings. No matter how much I'm tempted to add a bass part or to bring a bass on the road, I'm not tempted to, but I decided at the beginning, let's have 2 touch guitar players, and Pat Mastelotto, who, by the way, plays acoustic drums and electronic drums and can do loops and fascinating samples and things like that. So he's like 2 guys, and each of us is 2 guys, and let's have that be it. Mm-hmm. Let's not bring it. So occasionally, yes, rules, but very rarely. Usually, what I'm about is I have discovered about myself by doing interviews and having people ask me. That's how I discover about myself. I've discovered that I like to just go in and hear the music and then react to it, really in the music part of my brain. Mm-hmm. Oh, this would be good, and then kind of look around at my instruments and hopefully have something that'll realize that sound that I heard in my head.
Yeah.
And being we got a question from John Button himself. Can we call him SVT Time alumni? Is that
he is SVT Time alumni? So John, you know, a wonderful human being, bass player, plays with the Who, Sheryl Crow, and he's actually on in another couple of weeks. We're having John back as his own guest, because every time we've had him on, it's been with a group. But anyways, how do you feel about producing other musical endeavors other than playing bass?
Me?
Yeah.
I've produced a little. I know plenty about the recording process, and I've been involved in a lot of albums. I haven't produced that many tracks in my career, and I guess all of my own records, but I've done some others, and I enjoyed it. But my path clearly was to was and is to play bass.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Quick
You go
question. Just being as eclectic as a player you are, could you give us just a look into like your early music influences and I guess the mindset of, I feel like maybe this is just me, but like when you're playing, do you consciously take from different influences, or is it kind of like it's just flowing out of you and it just is from different influences that you just surround yourself with growing up? That's a lot of questions. I'm sorry.
No, very, very clear and very good stuff. It is. It's the latter of that. It just is. I don't think about, oh, Ron Carter would do this, and I'll try it to be Ron. I don't think that. And there's of course, a lot of influence from the greats and from the unknowns. I'm influenced a lot by a lot of bass players and a lot of musicians who are bass players, and I think we all are. And hopefully it's the right ones and it comes out well. That's what one hopes when one's trying to be musical.
Yeah.
What makes you musical, I don't know, but I've been influenced. I started out in classical, so in my very early years, I was obsessed with listening to classical bass players, true, but also just classical music. And I was very lucky that my older brother Pete was and is a musician. And so in my early years, when he could afford records, I was listening to the jazz records. He was always a jazz fan. And I've come to realize in my more recent years, I got a lot of years under the belt, but in the last 10, 15 years, I've come to realize how much I was influenced by Oscar Pettiford, a very good great jazz bass player of the 50s, who I heard. And I never at the time thought, well, gee, I want to play like Oscar, or I want to play that kind of music even. I didn't play that music for a long time. But as I think about it now, his choice of notes and the phrasing of the notes and kind of his musical sense that I hear when I hear his stuff, and I hear it now too. I listen, although I know most of it by heart. When I hear it, I think, well, yeah, in a way, that's what I've been trying to do in rock, is to be that kind of player. So, like all of us, I think I get influences. Some of them I'm aware of, and some of them is just something I heard on the radio yesterday or something I heard on YouTube nowadays. Can I mention that the big discovery for me, I'm always lagging behind what other people know, in 2020 of all this time at home, was the phenomenal number of bass players who are super players around the world, young kids,
Yeah.
just popping out of the woodwork. And to me, popping out of the woodwork, they were there all along. They knew that. I didn't realize until this year the level of the expertise of players, especially young players all over. And I'm constantly being surprised, challenged, inspired, and intimidated by it. All of that.
I was just going to say, discouraged sometimes or intimidated. Yeah.
I was trying to find that right word, that fourth thing.
I just want kids to know that when you're putting videos on YouTube now and you're just slaying on bass, like you are, to think that you could be intimidating Tony is just pretty awesome.
You're very kind, but I think people who play like that in somewhere in their awareness is that they could intimidate anybody. But we all, maybe it wasn't the best word, we all can be intimidated.
Oh yeah, totally.
And also we could. There's a better word lurking that's not coming to my mind of we can be like, whoa, I could never do that, but yeah. I'm growing from learning it, and maybe I'll just practice something like it. So come on, guys, what's the word for that?
It's intimidating, but you're admiring them at the same time. It's not like yeah.
I mean, you're not afraid. You're just like, whoa. Yeah. And to me, it's like whoa. I could never do that. If this is a 10-year-old playing, I could never do that. And then there's, whoa, that's amazing that can be done. I'm not afraid, and I'm not taking it personally. Those of us who were kicking around thinking we were pretty good bass players when Jaco came onto the scene, Jaco Pastorius, already went through that because he did stuff, at least as far as I was. He came to New York when I was in New York, and I was kind of not a hot shot, but I was okay, and I was kind of fast. But he came and showed us that there's a different degree, a whole different ball game going on, and a different league. And can I even be in that league? Maybe not, but that was. Let me tell you a story of I was in a jazz band. I think maybe it was with Mike Minieri. Maybe it was Steps. But anyway, we were recording, and a rare thing came up, a bass solo for me. I don't do many bass solos, and we got to the piece, and I said, guys, let me overdub the solo. I just could do it better. So they all take a break, and I'm in a booth, not in the control room, in a booth, and I start doing it, and I look into the control room, and Jaco Pastorius walked in during my bass solo.
That's nerve-wracking as it gets.
Yeah. I thought, this is not the way I would have written the script. That was my thought. I'm just going to put my head down, and I'm going to play it, and I'm not even going to go in there after I'm done, because I don't want to have any. I don't want to try to have a conversation. I just go through it. So maybe I have some practice at that. I could never do that, and what am I going to do with that knowledge, that musical knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's, and I go through the same thing, Tony. Like I don't scour YouTube, but obviously so many videos get sent to us of, hey, check this kid out or check that kid out. And I mean, some of these kids are 9, 10 years old and they're just burning.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a lot of times you look, I'll sit in front of the computer and go like literally like this, like, oh my gosh. But then at some point you have to sit back and go, it's almost like being secure in your own self and your own ability to say, this is what I do. I don't do that. And what he's doing is really cool. And I admire it. And yeah, it is kind of scary. And at the same time, maybe I can steal some of that too.
Yeah.
But we do what we do. And, people hire Tony Levin because they know what Tony's going to do. They know what you're capable of doing, writing parts, just so many things outside of just playing licks and being this burning player on YouTube. But also, in fairness, I try and put myself in that kid's shoes in the fact that when we were coming up, you'd get together with a garage band or you'd go to school.
Yeah.
Or, and that's how you became a better musician. 9-year-old, 10-year-old kids today, they don't have that. They don't have that outlet. Or I should say they don't have it. I think it's harder to find.
Yeah.
Where they can get together in a garage band, play their first gig at the VFW, or play a backyard party and start to develop their craft. And this is kind of their only outlet now, is to sit in their room and try and do what they're doing. So, for me, it's a different dynamic. And sometimes I have to remove myself and put myself in their shoes.
Mm-hmm. Dom, how do you feel when you hear something really ripping on the web? And
yeah, I think for me, it's like Dino. It's the initial reaction of like, holy crap, that's not me, and like, how do I do that? And then really recently, in the last, I'd say 2 months maybe, I have been on this kick of like exactly what Dino's saying. Like, I am me, and that kid is that kid, and Dino is Dino, and Tony is Tony, and we all just do our thing, which is supposed to inspire and bless other people. And I can't do that if I'm trying to. I really like what you said about like the different influences of like, you're just going into it being you. All those influences might be coming through you and flowing through you, but it's not a conscious like, I need to be this person, I need to be that. I think in the past I was maybe stuck in that mindset a little bit too much, where like, oh, I want to sound like this guy on this, or this girl on this, or whatever, and just be inspired by different people. But it was to an unhealthy amount, where instead of like, what is my playing style and what do I have to offer? Mm-hmm. Because somebody's hiring you because you are unique to yourself and have some unique, it's like Liam Neeson, I have a unique set of skills to add to a session. So, I mean, you can only be you, I can only be me. So I'm just really in this mode of like doubling down on that and really finding out who that is.
Yeah.
Well, I think if I can add yet more to this discussion, that different genres have different ways of traditional ways of bringing you up. And in jazz, and I didn't come up as a jazz player. I kind of picked it up somewhat later after classical. But in jazz, you kind of expected to learn the solos and the solo styles of the great players, and you should, and then only eventually do you grow into having your own style. And in classical, likewise, a classical pianist is going to be very aware of how a certain Rubinstein phrased that phrase and the tempo that Glenn Gould took the Bach thing at, and then they get their own way. Whereas in progressive rock, yes, you know what Chris Squire did and you know what John Wetton did, but the job is to not do that. The job is to go where your imagination takes you. So it's a different kind of ethic, musical ethic in different genres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Just because we're on this path here, and I want to share a really cool question we got from Steven. He says, Tony, you have had a career with such a leading edge of new music. Who do you listen to as a fan currently? I threw currently in that, but I think that was implied.
Yeah. Good question. I wish I had a great answer. But the truth is always the best answer for me instead of making up something. I've been asked that actually quite a bit. A couple of years ago, I would have said Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum, a wonderful band that really inspired me even more than other bands do, and I acted on it. I tried to bring some of that, whatever that is, into Stickman. But generally, and including this last year, I just don't have the musical time or space in my head to listen to as much music as I would like to. The reason is because I'm making music all the time. Except for this last year, I'm just out there on the road making music every day and doing sound checks and rehearsing and trying to write other stuff. And then in King Crimson, a 3-hour show at night with practicing before it. I don't then get back to the hotel and think, let me just listen to some music. Let me listen to a rock band. Others do, and bless them. That's great. So me, not so. And even home this year, I at the start of the empty year, I started try to tackle my overdue solo album and Stickman writing, and then tracks started coming in for me to play on, and it didn't leave me with the musical space to want to listen to other stuff. So I think there's great stuff out there, and I'm very influenced by it when I hear it, but I also stay away from it a lot, and sometimes I crave silence quite a bit. In the days before last year, when I drove a lot, I have a radio and I have a CD changer full of things that I want to listen to and do listen to, but I find that I can go 3-4 hours of driving with just silence, and it's kind of like, okay, and I'm more likely to get refreshed musically from that than I am by listening to something that I love or that's challenging, or either of those two things.
I'm exactly the same way, especially when writing. I need to have that headspace of clarity and to kind of reset and recharge.
Yeah, sometimes silence is the best music. I'm kind of the same way. It's especially when my kids are in the car, and they're teenagers and early 20s, but it's like, Dad, can you turn the radio on? It's like, no, shh, just listen.
You hear that?
Yeah, that's what's going on in my head right now. Nothing.
While you ask this question, give me one second. I mean, proceed. I gotta have a dog thing. 1 second.
I can relate.
Yeah, I see. I don't have any dogs here. I just got lizards.
Dino, why don't you read that question? Your French is good, I'm sure.
So, Tony, when you played with Jean-Pierre Ferland one album, did you play the SVT? Thank you, Sylvain from Quebec.
I love that, because my French now is going to sound good compared to his.
Thanks. You set me up on that one, didn't you?
I said, right.
That's why I left. I was like, Dino's got this.
For those who have not been to Quebec much, that was a very seminal, very important album that I just happened to luckily have been involved with way back in the 70s with Jean-Pierre Ferland, called Jean, something like that, The Color Yellow. And it's been very much on my mind, Sylvain, lately. Le Petit Roi, that song has been going through my head actually this last couple of days. So how timely that you ask about that. Did I play the SVT on the album? I don't remember. I just don't remember. Let me tell you what I know about that album. It was the first album I did in Montreal, which is not that far up north from where I live, and at the Les Studio, which run by Andre Perry, a really big name and a very influential guy in producing records and in running studios in Quebec. And here's what I remember. It was the first espresso I ever had. Excuse me. That calls for a toast.
Yeah. Okay. There we go.
Andre had an espresso machine, and I spent a lot of the album learning to make cappuccinos. Not very good ones, as I remember, but so that was wild. It was a long time ago, and very, very special music, and very very special to be part of such an important, politically an important album. And beyond that, even beyond important, it was really something, as everybody from Quebec knows. So there you go. Sorry that I don't remember what the amp path was. I think typically in those days, unless it was a heavy rock album, it would have been an Ampeg B15 in most studios, or Portaflex, which I could talk a lot about that amp. It was only kind of the rock bands that would bring in bigger amps, and maybe they had that in the studio. I'm afraid I don't exactly remember.
Yeah.
I guess if it's your choice, what's the mindset behind getting into a studio and using either the Portaflex or the SVT?
I'm going to say I like leaving it up to the engineer. For one thing, I learn from that instead of me coming, okay, here's my path, here's the way. I'm capable of doing that, but if the engineer says, hey, I got this way, I do it, it's something I never heard of, I'll go with that. I'm lucky that the albums I do in studios are generally at a level that the producer is very good and the engineer is very good. They know what they're doing. It wouldn't be the same if it was just somebody, well, I don't know, this is my amp or from home. But so I like to learn, and the path indeed changes a great deal. And the way it's recorded changes a great deal from project to project. All I care about is that it sounds good in the end, and if it sounds different than I sounded on some other albums, I don't mind that at all, if it's a way that serves the music that's being done.
Yeah.
Let me add that when I moved to New York, I had an interesting path. We all have interesting paths. So let me take back that sentence. I had a path, and I was a classical player only, and then I started playing jazz in Rochester, New York, where I went to school. And then I had a chance to leave town to join the Buddy Rich Band, a band on the road. And that kind of big band, it's not a road tour. There's no dates on it. You're just on the road. That's it. It's a permanent job. So it meant saying goodbye to Rochester, and I got rid of all my stuff, and I went to Boston, all the places where I'm from, to join the band, and it had been a change of plans, and they didn't need a bass player anymore. So there I was in Boston without much. Whatever I had was in my station wagon, and I thought, well, it was I don't know why I'm going so much into this, but it's interesting. Should I crawl back to Rochester and trying to get my gigs back and get an apartment back and some furniture, or stay here in Boston where I'm from, or maybe I'll go to New York? So I got just the next day, anyway to New York. Fast forward, I became a studio musician, and here's the point of this. I found that the studios in New York all had a B15 like I had. That was my amp, and in Rochester, and that was in the back of my station wagon. Sorry, my printer has decided to.
I'm sending you a fax.
Fresh fax, yeah.
And this is interesting. Every studio had that amp.
Yeah.
I had at that time a Fender Precision, a nice old 50s Fender Precision. I had the right bass that engineers wanted, and each engineer had his way of miking it. Some of them had hot wired it to take a feed out of the back of the B15. It was really fascinating and interesting. There was a thing called a bass amp club. All of these amps had a kind of a lock on them,
yes,
but they weren't locked. And so I was one of, or maybe the first, or among the first bass players to come to town, young bass players, to come to town and say, well, who do I pay to rent this amp? But here it is, and why should I pay anything? And how do I find them, and anything like that? So I was the beneficiary of bass players in the past who had got together and bought a whole bunch of B15s and put them in every studio, and eventually they got tired of locking them because they owned them. And some studio still has that B15 to this day.
Yeah, it's funny. First, man, there's so many questions I have just out of that. First of all,
First of all, why did you tell that story?
No. If you don't mind me asking, how old were you then when you moved to New York, Tony?
I'll have to do the math. Let's see. Give me a couple of minutes to do the math.
But I mean, just to kind of put it in perspective, again, getting back to my original statement about some of these kids that are on YouTube trying to develop their playing career versus, you started on the road with Buddy Rich. That's a whole nother question in itself that I want to come back to at some point too, because there's so many stories about touring with Buddy. But the first thing I want to comment on is, in those days, for those of you that weren't familiar, you had to have a key to unlock the amplifier. And if you were a union member, or I think if you were a union member, some guys had keys to the studio, to the amplifiers. And you had to rent the key from the studio if you weren't part of like the Manhattan Guitar Club or one of the local unions. And that was both for the guitar amps and as well as the bass amps, if I recall.
Wow.
Yeah, and then, as like you said, eventually they just left the amps unlocked, because at that point it was like everybody was using them and it was more of a pain in the butt. But yeah, if you come across like an old B15 or an old Reverber Rocket, some of those old amplifiers had key switches on them that you used to unlock the amplifier to use it.
Now, it was flip top into the cabin? It was locked that way, or was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Wow. But anyways,
I was 24. That was 1970. While you were talking, I was thinking.
Yeah. So,
and I didn't play. I was in the Buddy Rich band, but I was booted out before I played a note. So I didn't tour. I didn't tour with it at all. Later, I was to play with Buddy years later. But and frankly, that's as instructive for a young bass player starting out, because it was tough. It was tough, a tough moment to have given up everything to be on the road and suddenly not on the road. And those discouraging steps back have happened to every musician I know. Maybe not to every musician, but all the guys I know, no matter Steve Gadd, my buddy, no matter how successful they became, there were those days, there were those moments, there were those bands, there was those gigs where you can't help but take it personally, and you feel like you feel pretty low. And something about music, I wish that never happened to anybody, but the profession seems to call on all of us sooner or later to try to get over that hump and not take it personally, and to continue with what's important, which is making music.
Yeah.
With me, in that case, it led me to New York, which led to a studio career, which led me to meeting this guy, Bob Ezrin, the producer, which led to me playing with Peter Gabriel and Robert Fripp, which led to me doing what I'm doing today.
Exactly.
So yeah, it wasn't a great day for me, but looking back, it was my path.
It did work out in your favor eventually.
Yeah. Thank God you're on the East Coast traveling around. I mean, if you ended up like driving to LA from somewhere and they were like, "Nah, we don't need you," that would have been like, where do you go?
Yeah. I had a friend whose apartment, I begged him to let me stay in his apartment for what ended up being many months before I could afford a place somewhere. Yeah.
It's just, again, I know I said this in my email this morning. It's mind-boggling, Tony, because just looking at your recording credits, first, and I learned a lot about your early career too, from doing a little bit of research too, but from Buddy Rich to recording on Alice Cooper, recording. So your style is so, I shouldn't say your style, but your credits are so diverse. It's like today it seems like there's specialists in different styles. Like if I'm recording a metal album, I know which bass players I'm going to hire. If I'm recording a pop album, I know which bass players I'm going to hire. I should say no, but like they're specialized in certain groups. But you going from, Buddy Rich to Peter Gabriel to King Crimson to Liquid Tension to John Lennon. I mean, I looked at your resume is just amazing. I guess just being the right player for all that stuff. Has there ever been a situation where somebody has called you and you said, yeah, you know what, I'm not the right guy for this project. Maybe you want to try this person. Has that ever come across?
That happens plenty. Thank you, by the way, for your compliments about it. I think that career, I don't look back at it and look at the records, but a lot of it was luck and the nature of being a studio musician in those days. There were a lot of records being made in New York City, and 8 or 10 bass players doing all of them. So it was being in the right, having fallen into the right place at the right time. But thank you for the compliments. And there were, well, as a studio player in the 70s, to walk into a session, you're going to have to play the session. You're going to have to play it. You can't then say, no, I'm not the right guy. But subsequent to that, there have been plenty of times that I felt I wasn't the right guy. There are styles that I don't play very well, and I'll try given the time, but I don't think I could add up all the styles that I think I'm not the guy, not the right guy. And in addition, I would say sometimes I'm sent a track. This happened a couple times in the last 3-4 months. I'm sent a track where the demo bass part, I like it if people do a demo bass part to give me a sense of what kind of thing they want. And ideally, they'll let me do something different or keep parts of that. And I've been sent, the demo thing was, I call it demo. The bass part they did was so good that I just don't hear any way I could improve it at all. I could play it, if I had to play it on that piece, I would try to play the exact same part, maybe change a note or two. And in that case, I think the smart thing to do is to tell them that and say, in my opinion, you've got the right bass part right here, and I'm not the person to improve on that.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Speaking of studio and processes, I would feel, I know you've probably answered this a million times, but I would feel like I'd be doing our community a disservice if I didn't ask, can you please walk us through Sledgehammer and just that tracking process, particularly, your part, obviously.
Yeah. I remember because I've been asked before and I've been called on, I could, I see am I right that the lighting behind me changes if I lean forward no.
I'm not noticing.
I'm not noticing it here.
Because if so, I should stop leaning forward and just talk. Yeah, so Sledgehammer, Peter Gabriel has been known to take, my buddy Peter Gabriel, my longtime friend, can take quite a while to do an album or a song, or he can move along. So that came about when I'm thinking to be sure I'm speaking correctly. I think the album was done. We spent a lot, maybe a month on the rhythm tracks of the album, and it was done and had largely been turned into the record label. But as we were literally packing up, Manu Katché was packing up, and myself, Peter said, I got this idea for the next album. And I said, really? So? And he said, well, so could we just try it and see? And he played a Sledgehammer. And Manu, I haven't really listened to the original track in a long time because I've played it so many times on the road. But if I listened, I'm sure I would hear that he played in just a loose way that you might not play on in the same way if it's the take. If you've been working a week and okay, let's really get, he played in a loose way. And I also did it just really loose. Even though I kind of right away came up with a part, I didn't stick to it. I went off it in a way that I don't do once I lock in. Okay, this is really, I'm loving this part. I'm good. Okay, so there was that. I picked an unusual combination. I had the fretless maybe in my hand when he said, let's do this. And fretless, I don't play much with the pick, but fretless with the pick is like, well, that's weird. So I thought that could be appropriate. And I have this octave pedal. And that day, I've always had problems with octave pedals that some days they're my friend and they're tracking the notes I play. And some notes, they're just, bass players know what I mean. Sometimes they're going up and up, glitches, and they're going up and down and up.
Yeah, so, especially on fretless. It's hard to track on.
Yeah, the very pedal that later on the road was not my friend. That day it was my friend. So I had a good sound. I compressed it, I think, twice. I found a second compressor. That's how I did that sound. I later found out, many years later, that they compressed it 2 more times with better compressors, but less with more studio quality compressors. Mine were stop box. Maybe I only used one. I'm not sure. I'm exactly right about that. Anyway, thank you, Peter said, and we continued packing up. Okay, that someday we'll revisit that in 5 or 10 years for the next album. Yeah, but if I have the story correctly, somebody played it for the record label, and they said that's got to be on this album.
Wow.
So Peter, I would say this in front of him. Peter didn't have time to mess with it. The album was done, it was due, and suddenly this track, which sounded very good, and he added stuff. Certainly, he spent more time on it. But I'm saying he didn't have time to do the things he does. Especially, there have been other songs through the years that sound like right away like they could be a hit record, and then he'll put a 6-minute introduction onto it, and the hook, if you will, we never think in those terms, but the hooky part is only 30 seconds, and then it goes on for 12 minutes, and then he takes out the hooky part. There's been a lot of that. Yeah. So this, he didn't really, I think he didn't have time to do that. So it became the single that it became.
Okay.
Really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
My pleasure. And as I said earlier in our hour, they mixed the bass incredibly loud. They not only compressed it a lot, but I think the first time I really heard it was I was driving in somebody's car, and they said, "Can I want to play you my sound system? Here's this new Sledgehammer," and they had a lot of bass, as cars will have, and I really thought it was too much. I thought it was too much bass at that time. Later, I heard it on other systems, and it was just a lot of bass. It was okay.
That's cool.
Nice. There's another question about another track as well. A friend of ours, Carl Ayotte, is asking, please discuss Tony's contribution to Don't Give Up. Was it charted, or was that all you, Tony?
It's a story unfortunately I've told quite a few times, but it's a good story. It was 1985. My daughter, Maggie, had just been born, and her mother and I took her to England, even though she was 2 months old, for the track. I wasn't going to miss the tracking. I wasn't going to leave the new baby. And I, in my ignorance, I wasn't sure they had diapers in England. Of course they have diapers, but anyway, I packed Pampers all through the base cases. So all my stuff had Pampers everywhere. And I'm starting at the end of the song. At the end of the song, there's kind of a coda, a different section where I wanted more thumpy, more bassy sound. Same bass, but I'm looking around for foam rubber, which is usually in every studio. And just something to put under the strings. There's a pamper. So I put a pamper. I put a diaper under the strings. Yeah. And for what later Peter named the Super Wonder Nappy sound. Peter and Dan, the producer. So that's how that sound came about. But the way it's interesting, the way the part itself, to back up to the beginning of the piece, Peter had written, there was a new thing called drum machines that it wasn't the first drum machine, but a programmable drum machine. The first ones just had Latin 1, Latin 2, Latin 3. I think so there was one, Peter had programmed it, but you couldn't, when you turned it off, it would lose the programming. So, and he had programmed it and written the song to this, and I'll sing it to you. Boom, 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 boom. Just that one phrase. Yeah. If I'm singing it, it sounds different. It's just boom, 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 repeating. And so he's playing to that, and the drums started playing, and I thought, well, what if the bass played that? I didn't know really if that drum machine was going to be part of the record or not. It ended up not. But I played Peter's part, but I added notes to it, and then I made it a 4-bar phrase because and added a chord or two. So that's how that part came about. It was essentially Peter's rhythm and the quirkiness and rightness of it for the song struck me, and as is typical of all of the pieces I've done with Peter and with many people, the objective is to get a bass part that really works with the piece. It doesn't matter if it's exactly the part that the songwriter wrote or if it's the part that I write. I don't care. In the end, and in that case, in the end, we came up with quite a good part.
Interesting. Yeah.
We need to make a new Pampers commercial.
I was going to say, I see Pampers stock going up amongst bass players now.
And you can only imagine when we toured, my first attempt to try to suddenly stuff a pamper in. That didn't work so well.
Well, that's cool. I mean, like in terms of thinking outside the box, and obviously, well, what's inside the box, I guess in that case, in terms of just different things to use that aren't conventional. We had a question: how did you discover using the funk fingers, and was it out of necessity, or was that something you experimented?
Same thing in that it's a Peter Gabriel another Peter Gabriel story, and one that I've told before, and hence I remember it. On the album, So there was the piece Big Time, and in recording the piece, I thought, well, what if Jerry Moroder, our drummer, played on the bass strings, and I'll just do the fingering with my left hand, and he did that when it was something. It was kind of a rudimental thing, and it sounded pretty cool. A year later, I was unhappily shocked to hear the piece started out that way, and then that part went away, and there was another bass idea for the rest of the piece. But oh well. So I was really taken with the bit that was on there, and when we probably in 1986, if it was the same album, so yeah, probably it was. Anyway, we're touring, and I was. Obnoxiously at sound checks, I was practicing with one drumstick, trying to play because heck with the rest of the piece, I was going to do the part that I liked. So one day at sound check, Peter walked by me as I was doing this with my head down, and he said to me, with his very Peter thinking outside the box thing, why don't you take two drumsticks and attach them to your fingers to play? So it was another Peter Gabriel idea. And I turned to Andy Moore, my wonderful bass tech in those days, all the time on all the tours, and I said, jokingly, "Can we do that, Andy?" Meaning, can you put that together for me? And he did, and we had a wonderful time. The first ones, I forget what kind of rubberizing thing we did, but it would make my fingers turn bright red, or if they were too loose, they would fly out into the audience. But I found if I got it the right tightness, I could play that part, and I could play other stuff, and it was kind of fun. And later, I realized I had to wrap them in or rubberize them in some way, because the wood versus steel string, the wood actually, after 2 or 3 nights, it'd be only half of a funk finger left. And by the way, later I named them funk fingers, and I got them mass produced in a small way. The first ones I made at home, and I got somebody else to make them. And to this day, my friend Kevin Andrews makes them better than they ever were, with slight improvements you wouldn't know about. They're rubberized at the end, so they don't ever wear out. I still have the early pairs that I played with, and they're quite bizarre and useful in certain situations.
You were selling them for a while are you still selling them on your website, or can
No, I think on my website there is a link to Kevin's, the guy who makes them, to his Expanding Hands website.
Okay.
Yeah, I stopped selling CDs directly on my website and selling funk fingers. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing that I was on your website earlier too, that your beautiful book. That's
the book. There is something I sell on my website.
Yes.
I forgot. Yeah. I'm very happy to have this new book. What I did. Everybody should be asked, what did you do during the lockdown? Like, what did you do in the summer vacation you had? So I worked very hard at collating my tens of thousands of photos from all these years on the road. I've been taking pictures the whole time, never organizing them well enough to, okay, that goes for the book. So I went through them all at great length, and then thought of different ways to collate them, to put them together. And for me, it had to be a big coffee table size book, because I feel some of the photos really deserve that. They're very special, not because I'm that special a photographer, but because I was there with a certain vantage point of Peter Gabriel floating into the audience when he does Lay Your Hands on Me, and things like that, and early rehearsals of King Crimson when I joined them in the 80s and things like that. So I feel very good about it. It's called Images from a Life on the Road. I'm going to hold it up.
Yeah.
I only just got the book from the printers and started to ship them out.
Yep.
It's big book. Ooh.
That is beautiful.
Bill Bruford,
Very
Steve
cool.
Gadd.
Yep. Yeah, like you say,
hundreds of others.
These are all perspectives from perspectives that not everybody else gets to see behind the scenes, backstage. I especially love the cover photo.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
That is so.
Actually, my favorite picture in it is I already mentioned Peter Gabriel floating through the audience, and that was going to be the cover. And near the end of the process, I'm not going to try and find one photo. It's on 240 pages. Near the end of the process, just for some reason, my graphic designer put this other one on the cover, and I thought, oh, I didn't really want myself on the cover, but that really says what it's about. There I am taking a picture.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks. And there's a link on my website, I guess, tonylevin.com. There's many things. There's a link to a video of a bass piece I wrote using pictures from the book. That's the easiest way to get a sense of what's in the book, and also a link to my friend's record company's website, which is where we sell it.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you for mentioning that. I would have forgotten, even though I had it right here.
No.
Oh, in my studio, on top of my Don't Tell Him, Geddy Lee's book of bass.
Yes, love that book.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Another great book. Yeah, I leave that open to certain pages, so my wife sees them when she walks by. It's like
It's hint.
Yeah, hint.
Yeah. How many bases are in that book? Oh my God.
So many that even the Ampeg bases are included.
It makes me feel better about my own collection of bases, which some would say is too many bases.
Not a thing. Too many doesn't exist. Yeah.
So Geddy made us all feel better about that. So.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked. I don't know what the question is, but a gentleman had asked. Ulf Iverson, Tony, do you still use your first Music Man Stingray?
Oh, I don't think I have that. I don't remember which is the first, but I probably do not. I have one that's close to that.
Yeah.
I have
a relationship with you.
I have a wonderful relationship with it. I started playing Music Man. Kicking and screaming, I put down the Fender Precision and moved to my second bass, the Music Man Stingray. And back when it was Leo Fender's company, and then when Ernie Ball bought the company and started improving on what was already a fantastic bass, I became an endorser.
Okay.
And, I play other basses, obviously. There's a NS electric upright right behind me, but it's been my go-to bass for a long time. I'm pretty sure I don't have that first one.
Okay.
I have quite an interesting assortment of old ones though, and each is different, I suppose. Don't we all have wonderful relationships with our instruments? It's pretty great. They have their personality. They're pretty special.
Yeah, and like you say, you choose specific instruments for certain tracks because they do have a different personality.
Yeah. Well, one of the many weird stories about last year in the lockdown was my gear after King Crimson tour. Our last show was in Chile and in 2019, and the gear went to England, awaiting our next tour, which would have been last spring.
Mm-hmm.
And soon into the lockdown, I was really missing I have my main bases, but a very early, how early? Music Man. It's my yellow one. I've just been playing it since the Three of a Perfect Pair album in the 80s, and I didn't have it, and I don't need it much, but I was really missing it. And finally, I sucked it up, and I wrote to the management. I said, "You got to ship me that bass. I really got to have that bass." And the thing about one of the many weird things about this year is the shipping. Usually, lots of bands are getting a shipping container, a cargo, a big container for all the gear that goes on the ship. They pay per container, and so the other tour managers will say, "Hey, can you take Tony's bass and throw it in there?" Well, there was none of that because there were no tours, and so the cost. And also my NS electric upright was stuck there, and the cost of shipping them would have been more than buying a new bass. It was staggeringly high. So I did get a new bass of this and of the NS, and I'm still at some point deep in me, I'm missing that yellow Three of a Perfect Pair bass. But I know I'll hopefully this spring I'll get to hold it again and make music with it.
Yeah. It's funny because, like you say, this year has, or I should say, this last year has presented so many challenges that, I'm just, like you said, just being separated from instruments that, that you left in a certain part of the world that you can't get in touch with anymore. Hopefully, in this next coming year, there's tours will start picking up. I know here in New Hampshire, we're starting to see more and more smaller venues, local bands being able to perform more. Dom, I don't know what it's like in California. I think you're under a little more of a stricter lockdown out there, but, hopefully as we move forward, tours will start picking up. We'll get to see each other again. It really has been an amazing challenge in a lot of ways that I don't think a lot of people that aren't touring musicians don't really realize. Everything from, in fact, we were having this discussion just on one of our tea times, everything from not just musicians and touring companies, but riggers, lighting guys, circus folks. Everything in the performing arts has been put on hold because of this. And, some people, to more degrees than others, are hurting more than other folks are as well. So, this is going to move forward. Obviously this is all going to be behind us, hopefully quicker than later. And, we're all going to get back out on the road.
It's interesting. You wisely picked the word challenging. It's been a very challenging year and continues to be for musicians. And my friend Robert Fripp, when I wrote him and said, "How are you in this challenging year? How are you doing in this challenging year?" He said, "Well, artists need challenges." I like that. I like occasionally reflecting on that.
Yeah. He's actually been doing some pretty interesting stuff too. I've been following him on like his Instagram posts and his social posts, and it's like, it's really cool stuff that he's doing.
Sorry, I interrupted you when you were going to say.
No. I was going to ask you. This is kind of throughout your career, even now, is there a musician or an artist, whether alive or since passed, that you haven't worked with that you wish you could work with?
Jimi Hendrix.
That would be a perfect match.
Joni Mitchell.
Okay.
Many alive.
Yeah.
Plenty more, but
I'm sure. Yeah.
Right off the top of my head. Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix. Okay. All right. That came really quick too. So that's
Herbie Hancock.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool, man. I'm just looking to see if we have any, because I know we're over the.
I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to go all day, but also if there's any other questions, I don't want to ignore any questions that got sent in.
Yeah. No, was there ever a time when you got confused?
That's a good question about somebody read it to people who don't see it.
Yeah.
Am I right that people don't see that?
Hey, no, they actually are.
Okay.
Hey, Tony, really admire your playing in tone. You're a true legend. Very true. What are some of your favorite go-to settings on your SVTs? And also, how do you use your ultra-high, ultra-low switches in the context of the mix? Great question.
Well, let's talk about that I'm a legend part.
Expound on that.
I'm just kidding. There are no go-to settings because in my experience, they're not all the same. It's partly because I do some tours where they're rented in different venues, and I do some tour where it's rented for the tour. I don't always take my own. In fact, it's been a long time since I take my own SVT 2 Pro on the tour because there's that extra shipping that we don't really need. I don't use the super high boost and I don't use the super low boost, but I don't know how other people think of the process. I try to get the power without getting there's a kind of a low mid honk that I want to avoid. So I kind of you think I would know more after all these years we're on Ampeg, but I can twiddle the knobs until I'm happy with the sound. And it varies, of course, depending on which bass I'm playing too.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and just so people know, and maybe Tony, if you didn't know, it's funny how many things I didn't know about an SVT that I thought I knew. But if you kick in the ultra low, it is actually also adds it cuts
Mid scoop.
low mids as well. Yeah, it's adds scoop. So
Yeah.
that would be the thing you're looking for all this time.
Yeah. Well, everybody's use of it is different. For me, leakage on the stage, if bass amp on the stage, I really try to avoid leakage. I usually have it at a very low volume. There's a couple exceptions. Sting, Peter Gabriel in 2016, Sting and Peter Gabriel toured together, and I was luckily on stage with both Sting and Peter Gabriel. And Sting likes to hear, he's a bass player and of course plays mostly bass on his own pieces. He likes to hear physically the bass pretty hefty on stage. So because of his wanting to hear that on the few pieces that I played that he was involved with, I had the setup to play pretty loud. But still, in my experiences, the lows leaking into mics, especially vocal mics, makes the bass sound out front in a way I don't want it to sound. So if anything, I'm just talking about myself, but if anything, to me, the sound out front, the end sound is more important than what I need or what I'd like to have on stage. So generally, I'm having less low end moves your pant legs, makes you feel good. Right. Less of that than would feel good to me because of the end product, and hence the low boost, which is great. But for my purposes, especially if Peter Gabriel is going to do a piece like Mercy Street where he's actually crawling around on the stage in front of me with his mic with a lot of reverb and a lot of echo on it, gradually I've learned to turn the bass amp down or off even. I'll turn it off if he happens to crawl over near me because I've heard what the bass sounds like in the mix.
Yeah.
Now this is a shot. It's funny. A lot of the shots that you sent, and again, we're going back to old school here, but there's.
Oh, thank you for putting that up.
Very cool.
And I think I'm levitating.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were actually in that shot.
I must be happy.
But yeah, it's
it shows the amp very well too.
It's a lot of these shots. There's an SVT right behind you. Yeah. So that's very cool.
Yeah, somehow I could look up the dates of those, but I don't have it handy. Any more questions to put up, so we're not ignoring anybody? Or?
There's a lot of questions. How John Gilbert? Yeah,
that's a very good question. How did I get the John Lennon gig? Like almost any gig I got, I don't know. I just was called to play on it, and I showed up. And I'm not the person to show up and say, "Why'd you call me?" or "How'd you call me?" So what I know, I learned later when I heard a tape of John Lennon at a radio interview saying, "Oh yeah, they brought this guy Tony Levin. He was good. They told me he was good." And by the way, another story about that. When I showed up, I met John Lennon. He said, in a very New York, in-your-face way that I'm comfortable with, he said, "They tell me you're good, just don't play too many notes." Those were his very first words, only words to me the first day.
Love that.
I said, "Don't worry, I can understand." He was, somebody said, "This guy's really good. He's afraid I'm going to go nuts on the bass part," and I knew that I wouldn't, and he would be happy, and that worked out great.
Interesting. You don't play too many notes.
Yeah. Oh, and the epic lines on Wheels. I don't know offhand what lines I played on Wheels Go Round, but quite an experience. I was casual about, okay, I'm playing on John Lennon's record, great, but then he plays a song like When the World's Wheels Go Round, and you're hearing a John Lennon song, and you're the bass player out of 2,000 who could very well play a very good part on it, and you're the one that's there, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I'll just play that." And so as a bass player, it was the easiest falling off a log, to use a bad expression, to play a good bass part on a John Lennon piece. You have the background of how Paul McCartney reacted to those things, and great fun, and just an honor to be the one who happened to be there. It could have easily been. I think I have another tape of John Lennon saying I wanted Willie Weeks, but he was busy.
Oh,
so it could easily have not been me. And that's the way it is. I met Peter Gabriel. I think I mentioned an hour or so ago that the producer Bob Ezrin had used me in New York for Alice Cooper and Lou Reed. He thought of me as a heavy rock bass player, and so when he got asked to produce Peter Gabriel, he had me come up to Toronto to do that. I didn't know of Peter Gabriel. I hadn't heard Genesis at all. So how I got that gig or that opportunity, which ended up being a tremendous opportunity, was just by luck.
Wow.
Not a great answer to a nice question, but that's the way it works.
It's by luck, but also you were, again, we talked about like being authentically you, and that's who you are, and that's what
Well, I think we all, everybody's experience is different, but we play with other players, and we hope that we played in a way that made them want to play more with us. And if you multiply that times a bunch of bands per year and then a bunch of years, then we hope there's a body of players who like making music with us, and we hope that we'll be lucky enough that some gigs will come out of that, and they might lead to others, and some are not so lucky, and some play great, and it doesn't work out so well for them. I'm not really good at being wise enough to know to advise the past, but I'm smart enough to know that I was lucky, but also in a practical way, I was playing pretty good on the things I was doing, and not losing gigs for myself. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Plus, the personality has a lot to do with that, Tony. That's and you and I have hung out in the past, and you're just such an easy person to talk to. You're a great person to hang out with, and that translates to a lot. No, but obviously the hang.
I'm going to send some emails while you're doing this, because when you see the hands,
he seems way too calm to be an espresso guy.
Right. But no, of course, the hang has to, it has to be there. If you're going to spend time on a tour bus or in an airplane or spending the better part of your life with somebody on the road, you're just working with somebody like Dom and I, we personally can't stand one another, but we're forced to.
It shows. Let me tell you.
No, but the relationship and the personality is there too, and that I think that
thank you
into your body of work as well.
Thank you. I think we have quite a long relationship. I don't know how long, but many NAMM shows. Boy, oh boy.
Yeah, and this is special because typically anybody that comes into a NAMM show, it's usually, "Hi, how you doing? Go Pats, and I'll see you next year," sort of thing, and that's why we introduced SVT time, because it gives us an opportunity to catch up with each other too.
That's nice. And we should close it down. It's been a while, and I appreciate you guys being so not only personable, but complimenting me more than I would have liked to be complimented, but also you really put together an intelligent way to spend an hour together and talk about meaningful stuff.
Well, we appreciate you chatting with us for being here, and it's great to see you again. Like I said, we'll see each other on the road at some point very soon, and hopefully have you back on.
Thank you. Let me add before we finished that speaking about being on the road, the King Crimson's tour of last year was postponed to this year, and it looks like it's happening. Awesome. It's tour of the U.S. It starts with a tour of the U.S. in July and August. Okay. I have all the dates, but I don't need to say them now. And of course, there's the asterisk of, as with any tour, we don't know. But currently, it looks like it's on, and later in the year, Stickman will tour Europe. We hope in October, and King Crimson will then go to Australia and Japan in November, December. So it looks like it might be we might salvage kind of almost a year of touring sooner or later. And if not, then it'll be the next year. We'll try to stay healthy so we can do it.
I was going to say, between King Crimson and Stickmen, will you have time for Liquid and
Liquid Tension Experiment? Very good question. Because I've done quite a few interviews for that album release. That album is coming out in the spring, in March, next month. Not this spring. there can be no short-term plan of touring with Liquid Tension Experiment because it involves the other bands that everyone's in. Dream Theater. Two of the guys are in Dream Theater, and they have and I'm in King Crimson. Mike Portnoy is in about 30 bands, 40 bands, maybe by now 50 bands. But since we started this thing, so the stars have to align for all of that to allow Liquid Tension Experiment to tour. And in past years, it was like, well, maybe someday we'll tour. But I must honestly say that the feeling this time, we really liked the album and the experience of being back together. And I can't quite speak for the other guys, but I think they share my feeling of that we will tour, we want to tour. And so it's a matter of looking for that time when even if it's just 10 days is all we need to do a 7-day tour. That's what we had last time in 2008. There will be that time and we'll grab it. But I'm not sure when. It certainly won't be this year.
Okay.
And what an exciting time that's going to be to be in front of live music again, to be performing again. I actually, we were talking about this, I remembered I had a dream last night that I was walking through the street and there's venue after venue and there was lines out of each of the doors. And I walked in one and I got on stage and I was supposed to play a song and I just started crying because I was so happy.
Oh my God.
So,
what a dream.
Try not to cry when you're on stage, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to cry from that dream. And when I'm on stage, I'm going to cry. That's wonderful.
It was just, I think people are just so excited. I know I am to experience live music again.
I'm going to cry when I see you on stage, actually. I'm going to laugh when I'm on stage.
People do cry when they see me on stage, so we'll just leave it at that.
I'm going to do both. I'm going to do both.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks,
today.
guys.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all those stories. And
My
pleasure.
Everybody's commenting in historic podcast. This made my day. So at the very least, we made some people happy today, and that's all we can ask for.
Thank you. Thanks all of you for tuning in. Appreciate that.
Cool.
Take care.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to